I'd like to say that I was smart enough to be there and to capture every great story I ever heard. But that isn't true, and I have a prime example of it to show you next. One of the best stories that I ever found and that I ever had, I wasn't there for. I was doing television commercials for Mobile, part of its bicentennial series, something that I created called Extraordinary, Ordinary, Unknown Americans. One of them was Nettie Mitchell up in Maine. It's how I got to move to Maine. And she kept saying to me, I've got a story, I've got a story. And I kept saying, but Nettie, we have to do this commercial. At the end, I left my camera crew and they recorded this story. The story is called Emmeline. It became a television documentary. You're about to see a part of it, small piece, called Sins of Our Mothers. A book was done called Emmeline by Judith Rosner that she thinks of as her best novel. An opera, Emmeline, just came out, and who knows what will be next. All because I was smart enough to leave the cameraman, but he was smart enough to set up a beautiful shot and to let an incredible old lady tell an incredible story.
They used to tell it as a bad example, don't be Emmeline, don't ever do what she did. Mind your own business, stay at home. The whole bit about woman not doing anything but what Papa tells her to.
I am Nettie Mitchell. I am 89 years of age. I live in the town of Fayette, where I was born and have lived practically all my lifetime. And I would like to tell you one of the saddest and most heartbreaking tales that has come to my notice. Is a true story. Something that happened right here in this town in the long ago. I knew this old lady when I was a tiny child, and she was very sweet and lovely. She was one of a large family of children in a very impoverished home in the early 1800s. At the age of 13, visitors from Lynn, Massachusetts, arrived at their home, and seeing the poverty and deprivation there, said, why don't you let us take Emmeline back with us to Lynn, and she can work in the cotton mills. She's old enough to work there. And she can go work in the cotton mills and send you money to help with the expenses back home. They thought it over and decided to let her go, and she went. She was an efficient, hard-working little girl, but she was entirely among strangers in a strange land, very, very different than anything she had ever known before. Among those who were friendly to her, as most of them were not because she was entirely different, was her young boss, a young man. And he became very friendly, and she yielded to him, to his persuasion. And by the time she was 14, she was the mother of his child. She did not dare to let her people back home know what had occurred. The people where she was staying made arrangements to sell her baby to a childless couple nearby them who would pay her expenses and pay for her transportation back home if she would go as soon as she was able. She returned to her home, and she worked very hard in the fields and all, but she didn't join very freely in the social life of the community. As she grew older, her parents and others began to wonder why it was that she shunned all the young gentlemen around. She was a very pretty girl, and they couldn't understand it. In her early 30s, while she was working at home, a young man came to town to build highways. And he was a very personable young chap, and he came to board at their home. Although she was so many years older than he fell desperately in love with her, and she with him. And they decided to marry and have a home of their own. They did, and built a little cottage down by the shore of Mosher Pond. They moved in there and had been married something less than a year when his people from Massachusetts decided to come to visit them. They came down, and to their horror, they discovered that he had married his own mother. Of course, when this was revealed, the marriage was annulled, declared broken up, and he reluctantly bade her goodbye. It was considered a horrible sin for her to have had the child, and she had married illegitimately, and therefore she was entirely ostracized.
To be shunned by family and friends in a 19th century New England village was almost the equivalent of life imprisonment without trial.
No one went to comfort her. No one helped to support her. The silence of all those years